Okay, we're going to talk about nutrition. And remember, the fungi have those cross walls that are septate or they're aseptate, so the nutrition is going to be able to flow back and forth through the hyphae. Now, there are going to be three different kinds, and this is going to be according to how they obtain their nutrients. There are the saprophytic fungi. These are the ones that in the environment release the enzymes from their hyphae. They break the organic matter down extracellularly and then they absorb it back. So we do have a lot of fungus in our environment, especially on the forest floor, that are helping other bacteria break down our nutrients. Remember, our decomposers, guys, are the most important members of any ecosystem because without them, it really wouldn't support life. Now we have our parasitic fungi. So parasitism, these last two, are types of symbiotic relationship. A symbiotic relationship just means it's a relationship between two different organisms. So with parasitic, one is harmed and one benefits. We went over some of our fungal diseases. Those are all types of parasitic diseases because it's good for the fungus. They're getting nutrition from us. However, it's a negative effect because they're actually causing us disease and they're actually very difficult to get rid of. So we have our parasitic fungi. Then lastly, we have mutualistic fungi, which we'll talk about later in the PowerPoint. And this is where both of them benefit. And in our environment, there are a lot of examples. We're only going to really go over two, but there's a lot of examples where fungus pairs up a lot of times with an algae, and they have a very beneficial role in our environment. So there's not going to be any mutualistic relationships with us. Yeast probably could be considered if it doesn't overgrow a mutualistic relationship because yeast does help us ferment our food and break it down. Of course, when it overgrows, it becomes parasitic. Now, saprophytic fungi, there are decomposers. They're recycling our nutrients from dead organisms. Our parasitic fungi are absorbing nutrients from living cells or other organisms. So we talked about those. Also, and mutualistic, that's going to be a relationship with another organism in which both benefit. All right, with reproduction, fungi are classified by their structures and patterns of reproduction. Guys, fungi can reproduce either asexually or sexually, and there's going to be four phyla that we go over, four or five. And most of the time, in favorable conditions, fungi are going to reproduce asexually. But when there's harsh conditions, which for a fungus would be a dry environment, very little nutrition, they're going to reproduce sexually. Now, with this sexual reproduction, there's opposite mating types, and you're going to see pictures of these life cycles up here. And you need to note that one of the hyphae or the spores, because they reproduce by spores, are going to be positive, and some you're going to see a negative sign on it. That just means there's not really any male or female fungi, but they do have opposite mating types. So when the opposite mating types join, that's sexual. And the only phylum that we're going to talk about that reproduces sexually all the time is Basidiomycota, which is our mushrooms. But most of the time, these fungi are reproducing asexually. They can just release their spores fall to the ground. If the conditions are favorable, then they can produce a new hyphae, which is going to grow into a mycelium and then ultimately a fruiting body. Now, asexual in fungus is going to include budding. This is the way that yeast reproduces, fragmentation, and spore reproduction. Budding is actually just where, like a little bud, and you know what a bud on a plant looks like. It looks like a little pimple. It's just going to form off of one of the fungi, and then it falls to the ground, and you've got a new fungus. Fragmentation is where the whole fungus just fragments. It's like dropping a glass and the whole thing shatters, and all those fragments are going to be able to reproduce new hyphae and mycelium. And then, of course, we have spore reproduction as well. So know that there's going to be different types of reproduction as we go through these phyla. All right, taking budding first. This is yeast. Yeast always buds off, and is a type of asexual. And you just have a new cell that is forming off of the parent. It looks like a little bud, and then it's going to pinch off of the parent cell, and it's going to fall to the ground. And if conditions are favorable, that means if it's damp, if it has a food source, then we're going to have a whole new hyphae that will grow into a mycelium and ultimately a fruiting body. Fragmentation, this is also asexual. When the mycelium, the drain clog, when the mycelium breaks apart, it fragments, and wherever it lands, if it's suitable, again, if it's a damp environment and there's food, the hyphae is going to grow into a new mycelia, and you will end up with a new fruiting body. All right, spore reproduction. The asexual and sexual life cycle of most fungi do include spore production. Spores are asexual, and they're going to develop into a new organism a lot of times without the fusion of gametes. So spores can produce a new hyphae that form a mycelium. Now, when we talk about spore dispersal, that means how do these spores get dispersed? Know that wind is the number one way. Even with mushrooms, we know what the gills underneath the mushroom looks like. There's spores in there. And when the wind comes along, those spores are blown from their location on the fungus. They fall to the ground, and then we have a new mycelium and fruiting body. The second most common form of spore dispersal is going to be water. And then third would be animals, because we know that animals can pick them up on their coat. But wind, water, animals.